I've got one flame to burn, one race that I can say I ran.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to the 21047.com podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright, and I am the host of this show. I'm really glad to have you along listening today, wherever it is that you're listening, and whenever it is that you might be listening in. I'm just thankful to have you as a listener for this episode. This episode is sponsored by my dear friend, Donna Schultz-Schegena. I hope I got that one right, Donna. I've been working on it, and Donna's always faithful to help me pronounce her name a little bit better. So maybe I'm getting better, maybe not, Donna, but nonetheless, I am so grateful to have you as a sponsor. Donna sponsors this show and my 21047.com mission through Patreon. Patreon is a platform where listeners and fans, friends, family can go support this effort, the 21047.com effort, through a monthly financial commitment. And so if you want to check that out, and there's some cool perks involved, including getting recognized as a show sponsor, you can go to my website, 21047.com, TWOTIM47.com. Just click on the supporters tab, and then you can get some more information about Patreon and how you can support me through that platform. Today's episode, what a great episode. I recently went down, as many of you know, and attempted to run the Houston Marathon. That didn't go well. Came up just a bit short. But, in this running journey, what I have found is that, you make a lot of plans, whether it be I'm going to plan to run this race, I'm going to plan to go out and do this training run. And inevitably, some things come up that you never saw coming. The whole Houston Marathon was something I absolutely never saw coming. And so one of the things that's come out of this Houston Marathon that I didn't see coming is the acquaintance of Miss Bernie Tretta. Lachelle Head, who went down to Houston with me, she stumbled upon this story that included Bernie and some of the work that she's doing down there in Houston with disabled athletes. She passed that along to me. I reached out to Bernie, and boy, she was just so gracious to come on and have a good conversation with me. And so I want you to enjoy my chat with her, and I think you'll see the theme continue and my conversation with her, that you get into this running journey and you have no idea what's coming your way once you start running. And listen to her conversation with me and just count the number of things that come up in her running journey, simply because she took some bold steps forward. She was willing to kind of tackle what came her way that was either a prompt. I say it all the time. I get these prompts from God when I'm out there running. And so it looks like Bernie had some prompts along the way that she said yes to. And then just listen some of the incredible things that she's doing with her running journey for other people. Like she says in the podcast, she talks about running. Sometimes people see it inherently as a selfish sport. Well, I think when you get done listening to Bernie chat with me here for a few minutes, you'll understand in many large ways that running is far, far, far from a selfish sport. So I want to turn it over to my conversation with Bernie Tretta. Well, I want to welcome Bernie Tretta to the 21047.com podcast. So welcome, Bernie.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, so I recently ran the Houston Marathon, or I attempted it, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But after I got back from Houston, a friend of mine who went down there with me sent me this news clip about this woman, which was you, and it looked like a friend who've been doing some work with disabled athletes down there. And so I read this story, and one thing led to another, and I reached out to you, and so now here we are talking. So I'm anxious to dig into your story.
Okay.
Well, the first thing I want to ask you, I ask almost everybody that comes on here, because even though the podcast is a little bit deeper than running, it usually is runners and these running stories that I'm pursuing. So I know you're a runner. How did you get your start running?
Well, so there's how I started running and then how I got addicted to running. I started running when after I graduated college and I was living in California and I got my first job, instead of getting the freshman 15, I got the first job 15 or 25. And so I put on weight at a desk job. And so I happened to, we had, one of those beginning of the year challenges where everybody tries to lose weight. And so we were having one, but it was a pretty cutthroat thing. It was a bunch of engineers in the office. And so we had this whiteboard where everybody's names and weights were written down. It was $100 to buy in, and whoever won, it was like winner take all. And so, and there were all these side bets, like I'll bet you that they can't lose weight. And then you were incentivized to take somebody to lunch. And it was whoever lost the largest percentage of body fat and kept it off. So that was the dinger. You had to keep it off. And so we all just started, doing stuff. And I ate Carl's Jr. every day because it was next to the office. And so I cut out fast food. And I was like, I better start this working out nonsense. And I had read somewhere that running burns the most calories. So I started running. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just kind of started. And lo and behold, I lost the weight. I won the weight loss challenge because I was the only person that kept it off. And then I really enjoyed running. So I kind of stuck to it. So that's how I kind of fell into running. But then how I got addicted to running is a different story.
Well, tell us the addicted story.
Okay, so I had moved to Texas, and my brother was in college. My brother's about 8 years younger than me, so he was still in college, and I was out, and he called me one day and said, so there's this girl, and I'm trying to impress her, and I told her we're running a marathon together. And I was like, well, that's just silly. And he said, well, we're going to run the marathon together. So I had never even thought about a marathon. And honestly, it didn't even occur to me to say, no, you're stupid. I was like, well, okay. And so I started training very badly. And then the following spring, it was like 6 months later, my brother and I and his girlfriend, he got the girl, we ran our first marathon together. It was all of our first marathon, and it was so much fun. By the time I finished, I said, we have to do this again. And so my brother and I ran our first 5 marathons together. And then I just kept on keeping on.
Oh my goodness. That is a great first marathon story. So now, what was it about you that made your brother think, hey, I'm just going to rope her into this thing, that made him think she's going to go for this? Because if this was a strategy to get the girl, he must have been pretty sure you were going to be in.
Yeah, I think because I'm gullible and maybe naive. Yeah, and he couldn't have convinced my other sister. If my other sister can't run it in high heels, she's not interested. So,
that is. And which marathon was this?
This was the Houston Marathon.
And how long ago was that?
That would have been 2006.
So you said you ran your next 5 marathons together. How many marathons have you run, Bernie?
I have run 41 marathons and I think 5 or 6 ultra marathons.
What were the chances this day when you're running first marathon, all in on helping your brother get the girl? If somebody would have told you, hey, by 2018 you'll have run 41 marathons, what would you have said to somebody who suggested that?
I would have said they were crazy. I thought, I'll run one. And then when I was excited at the finish, I said, okay, I'll run one more. And I was doing one a year, and I didn't think I would even make it to 10. And even when I decided to do 40, so the reason I was aiming for 40 was I turned 40 in October, and so I wanted to run 40 marathons before I turned 40. And I really didn't even think when I was at, 25 or 30 that I would make it to 40 marathons. So I would say not a snowball's chance in hell.
Well, how many do you have in your future? Have you thought about that?
I'm thinking about retirement. No, I honestly, I don't know. did 40, and then I said I really need to take some time off, and I had forgotten that I signed up for Houston, so I was like, fine, I'll do 41. And so now I've told myself, and my husband has kind of told me as well, that I'm not allowed to run another marathon for at least 6 months, that I need to take some time. And then we'll go from there. But of course, people are saying, oh, do you want to run this? Do you want to run that? And it's been tempting, but I'm promising myself at least 6 months off.
What's your favorite marathon experience?
Ooh. So I guess my favorite marathons is, well, Houston and, of course, the Boston Marathon. But my favorite marathon experience,
yes.
Gosh, it's going to be a tie between my first Boston and my third, the year right after the bombing. So, of course, your first Boston, there's nothing like it. I probably cried through half the race. It was so magical. And it was a horrible race. I mean, I ran like an hour slower. I was just so, it was like 80 something degrees during the race. But it was just magical. But then I ran the year of the bombing, and the year after the bombing, I guided a blind woman, and she had not finished and I had not finished the year before. And so we ran together, and to get her to, so I didn't realize how emotional it would be to run on that course after being pulled off of that course and seeing all of the tragedy that happened. And so being there the next year was really emotional. And then when Meb won, I mean, I still can't watch the video of Meb winning without just breaking into sobs. It's so beautiful. So, that one might be one of my favorite ever.
Wow. What a story. And the blind runner that you helped, what were her emotions at the end of that race?
Oh, well, so what was funny was she made fun of me in jest, about me crying, because where I got stopped was on Com Ave, just going underneath the bridge, so at about mile 25.75. And she got stopped about maybe a half mile further, right when you turn into the home stretch. You turn, right on Boylston, right on Hereford, left on Boylston. So she was right before she turned on Boylston, and she got stopped there. And so she was kind of making fun of me because, when I hit that spot, I really started crying. I was like, oh, my God, I was here last year. And so I didn't expect that. So she was kind of making fun of me. And then when she got to the spot where she stopped, she started crying as well. And she was like, oh, my gosh. I was like, yeah. And so it was a mixture of, sadness and happiness. And we were both very emotional.
Understandably. That would be a marathon experience, I think, that would stick with you. So tell me, in these 41 marathons now, what have you learned about yourself, or what has marathon running taught you along that running journey?
I think one of the biggest things, there's a lot, I guess, that it's taught me, but you can go so much further than you think you can. And there's so many down points in a marathon where you're just like, oh, this sucks. I don't want to go any further. And you can keep just moving forward. And one foot in front of the other is still, getting you there. It might be getting you there slowly, but you're still getting there. And, you can go, there's so much more in you than you think you have. And, when you're having a bad day or whatever, it's going to pass. Just like those moments, you have no idea what's around any turn and any corner and any mile. And it's so wonderful that you could be at mile 22 and hating life. And then by 23, everything's wonderful again. You get a goo, you get a Gatorade, you get a high five, whatever it is. And you suddenly all of that has washed away. And so the same with life. If you just stick around long enough, it'll get better. It'll definitely have some down points, but you can go a lot further than you think you can in life and in running most times.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking about your brother calls you and says, hey, we're going to run this marathon together. And then that leads you to the Boston Marathon. It sounds like multiple times. And then to this person that kind of has this great perspective about overcoming racing and life. Were you Was this kind of the person you were when you started running? Did you have a lot of this in you to begin with, or did running help establish some of this in you?
I think running established it. I think it was always there. I just don't think I knew it was there. So I'll say running gave it to me. I think everybody has that inherent fortitude and grit that running can bring out. You just might not know it's there.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. Well, the story I read talked about your involvement in a group called Achilles Houston. Tell me a little bit about Achilles Houston.
So Achilles Houston is part of a larger international nonprofit called Achilles International. And Achilles International started in New York City about 40 years ago by a man named Dick Traum. And Dick was an amputee, and he wanted to run the New York City Marathon. And the New York City Marathon kind of said, well, no. And he said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So he went out and he ran the marathon, and he became the first amputee to run a marathon. And then he decided amputees need more support. So he created the Achilles Track Club. It was a running club for amputees. Well, then little by little, people started saying, well, it's not just amputees that need help. So they expanded, and it's currently now all disabilities, and it's all over the world. So I started the Houston chapter 5 years ago. Actually, our birthday was 2 weeks ago. But so I started the Houston chapter, and our goal is to help people with disabilities, any type of disability, whether it's a physical disability or an intellectual disability or developmental disability, any disability, participate in sports. We encourage running, but we really will do anything. We do yoga and CrossFit and kayaking and rock climbing. It's just about getting off the couch and realizing that there's a larger life out there for you and supporting you in the journey to that.
Now, where did your connection to this organization begin?
During a marathon. So I was doing a race, and there was a blind man that was being guided in the race. They were tethered together, and I was very intrigued, and they happened to be about the same pace as me, so we ran a lot of the race together talking, and they told me all about this organization called Achilles, but they were not, the race wasn't in Houston, and they told me about this, and they said, well, we have no idea if there's anything in Houston or not, but you could just go online or call New York City, where the headquarters are, and ask them. So I did that. I called New York, and I said, hey, I want to get involved. What do you have here in Texas? And they were like, well, we don't have anything. And they said, but you can start something. There's another woman that was interested. So I reached out to her, and she and I talked about it, but she had some illnesses, and she got very sick and decided she didn't want to. And I, at that point, couldn't really do it myself. So we just kind of walked away. And then 2 years later, I ran into her in a bookstore, and she said, did you ever get that off the ground? And I said, no, I never did anything. And she said, well, you should call them up again. So I called New York City, and I said, do you remember me? Is there anything happening in Houston? And they said, no, but if you want, you can start something. And so I did. And so that's how it stuck.
That is, yeah, I mean, running for me, and it's a lot of this podcast too, there are just so many parallels between the running journey and this life journey. And one of the big ones that in this podcast is a piece of that. One of the big ones with me this past year has been just the importance of taking that first step. I mean, you seeing that, taking that first step to call New York, taking that next step to call this other woman. And I've just found this year that when I take those steps, something good is usually coming on the other end of it. I personally believe that just God is working in my life. If I'm willing to take a step, he'll help me create something with that.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like that's an idea then that just wasn't going to go away for you. Now, so when did you, it sounds like you actually then probably had a first marathon experience helping your own disabled athlete?
Yeah. Gosh. So when we first started the chapter, we still do. We have a lot of hand cyclists and wheelers. So people that use wheelchairs or hand cycles, which is like a cross between a wheelchair and a bike in that they use their hands to kind of crank them forward instead of pushing the wheels directly. And so there were definitely events where we would go out, but the first time I actually guided somebody in a full marathon, I guess was the Boston Marathon, the year of the bombing. He was an amputee runner. He was incredible. And we were on track, and it's kind of one of those blessings in disguise. So he was kind of struggling. He was having some problems with his prosthetic rubbing, and then he tripped and fell. And the foot plate of his prosthetic got twisted, and we couldn't find an Allen wrench. I mean, who has an Allen wrench with them? And so he had trouble running downhill while we were in Boston. So he kind of had to walk down the hills or shuffle down the hills because his prosthetic was giving him problems. And that happened somewhere around mile 20-something. But we had targeted to be, and we had been on track until he fell. We had been on track to cross the finish line within a minute of the bomb. And so we then had to slow down running downhills, which, you know, is kind of, there's a lot of downhills in Boston near the end. And so that slowed us down. And so thankfully we were at 25.75 when the bomb went off and not 26.2. But yeah, so that was my first guiding experience.
Wow. What a memorable first experience. And then it sounds like then the next year you went back and were able to finish it, also guiding one of the athletes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What do you see this meaning in Houston to the athletes you all are able to help? I mean, what does this bring to their life?
So Houston, like as a city, sadly, is not very disability friendly. It's kind of this mentality of like, we'll just brush things under the carpet if they don't fit into our nice little box. And so it's kind of been two-parted in what Achilles has been able to bring to the city. And one of that is recognition and exposure to people with disabilities. And, with that comes understanding and acceptance. But then for the athletes themselves, it has brought, it really has opened up their lives from what they've told me. Like they thought, I can never do this. And then here they are doing it. And even the ones that truly physically might not be able to participate, just having that camaraderie. And we tell people all the time, when you have some form of disability, you often get injured more often than everybody else. So that's okay. Come out to the workouts anyway. Join us. Just build this sense of family and camaraderie. And so we have kind of helped people open up their lives a little bit into recognizing that they can do this and that they can still be healthy and they can still be active and they are still valued members of society. They often feel like they get labeled as, invaluable or unvaluable. And that's not the case at all. They still, just because you have some sort of impairment doesn't mean you're not a worthwhile human being. And this has kind of brought some of that back to them to realize that they have just as much worth as everybody else.
So I'm curious, when you talk about this, I mean, you're clearly very passionate about it. I mean, you can just hear this coming out. Did you have some sort of passion in you before you had this experience on the race course in terms of helping, the disabled community, or was this something that was born in that initial interaction? I'm just curious where this came from. That, yeah. Like I said, I hear it loud and clear in your voice.
Yeah, it was just born from this whole experience. I am not disabled, and I'm not married to somebody disabled. I don't have a disabled child, and which I know a lot of people get into that because of something very personal like that, and this wasn't the case. It's just that as I have been involved, I have uncovered, I guess, more and more injustice in what we're seeing. So I'm doing everything I can to prevent that, banish it. I do advocacy. Any race that I can think of that is not wheelchair accessible, I'm going to go out and talk to them and help them. The Houston Marathon was one of them. They had a very, very small wheelchair category of maybe 2 people a year. And so I approached them and said, please let me make this better. And so we had 53 athletes and 63 guides participating in the marathon this year. I'm their director of athletes with disabilities program. And so I'm like any race that needs help, I'm willing to get out there and, push my sleeves up and get involved because I am passionate and I do see a need. But it has just developed over time. It's nothing that was already there. I sadly was one of those Houstonians that didn't really know it existed.
Yeah, and I'm just blown away. It's an amazing story to look back at. I'm sure you have. Again, when we trace it all the way back, kind of the beginning of this conversation, your brother out to get the girl calls you, let's run a marathon, leads to this chance encounter out on the marathon race course that has ignited this passion in you. It's an amazing story. But, I talk with a lot of people and I've said this before that, there's this story at the front of the race course and it's especially true for me. I'm never going to be in a race where I have a chance to win. I've embraced that reality, especially when it comes to a marathon. But that's a very small group. And then the rest of the folks really just have these incredible running stories. And that's why I love doing this. I'm not talking to many people that have a chance of actually winning. It's in the back of that pack or in the middle of that pack where people are running for just some incredible reasons and they're finding strength from incredible places. And yours is just a fascinating story. So the volunteers you get to come out, how do you see this changing their lives and maybe their perspective about folks with disabilities there in Houston?
Yeah, so I think with the volunteers, it's very similar in the sense that they too have often been guilty of overlooking people with disabilities at times, and it gives them so much more interaction and knowledge into the intimacies of somebody's life with a disability. And, it's a really safe space that we create where, it's okay to ask, how long have you been blind? How much can you see? When you dream, do you see things? Or, what are your dreams like? Or, questions about people in wheelchairs. And so it really builds a lot more understanding for them and a lot more compassion then. And what they have said is what they really like is oftentimes when you volunteer, you don't get to see the direct impact of what you're doing. But when you're there helping somebody through a workout one day or helping them through a race, or even training to get to the race and then doing this race with them, that is a real sense of accomplishment for the guide as well as the athlete, but then it's dual for the guide in the sense that not only did they do that race, but they helped somebody else do that race. So they get to experience it in a different light. So it's, people often say that running is an inherently selfish sport, but if your race is literally for somebody else, you are their eyes or ears or whatever it is out there on the course, then that race is no longer about you. It's about somebody else. And then that takes all that selfishness out of running. And those volunteers really, they gain an awful lot. They, in addition to the knowledge and compassion, they gain a lot of pride for them and their runners.
Yeah, I'd have to say, I don't know. And so I just started running myself, 4 years ago. So I was almost 50. Running like I'm running now. And I think the reason I've got addicted to running is the running community. I've just found this kind of spirit that I'm hearing in you and just all around me. I'm part of a group that started running in response to a young woman in our community who was hit and killed by a drunk driver while she was out training for the Boston Marathon. She left behind 3 little children and a husband, and a plea went out on Facebook, let's run for Meg. And so this group, Meg's Miles, formed. And, I think, I said this the other day, I was talking with somebody, I think people come, and there's about 15,000 people on this Facebook group. I said, I think they come far more for just this human spirit and this human acceptance and this human interaction than they do for running advice, and certainly we talk about running.
Right.
But I don't know. I have found this to just truly be part of the running community, this spirit that you show and that your volunteers certainly show. So I'm glad to hear it. If I'm hearing you right, then there's a couple of things for folks listening that they can do in their communities to help advocate with you. One certainly would be to volunteer and help get involved directly with the disabled athletes. But it sounds like the other thing, which I hadn't really thought of, is to, when you sign up for these local races, check into them and see how wheelchair accessible they are.
So, yeah, if you know somebody in a wheelchair that wants to participate, then reach out. I talk to race directors all the time, and it's not limited to Houston. I talk to race directors all over the U.S., and I just talked to somebody in New Zealand yesterday. And so Achilles International helps on all kinds of levels with that. So, yeah, like if there's a race in your community and you want to make it wheelchair accessible, talk to the race director, call Achilles International in New York City. Achilles International in New York manages the Athletes with Disabilities division for the New York City Marathon. So there are nearly 500 people in wheelchairs or blind or mobility impaired that are out there running, and they manage all of that. So, yeah, there are resources for you, lots and lots of them.
Well, I'll make sure when I post this podcast to share the link there to Achilles International, and certainly your email, if that's okay, if folks want to reach out to you and get some tips on how to advocate. So I think you and I, in sharing some emails the other day, I picked up on something that I hadn't picked up on in the stories. It sounds like you also coach runners.
Oh, only sort of. So I was a part of a program called PIM, Power in Motion. It was a Couch to 5K program. And in doing that and in doing Achilles, I got USATF certified as coach. And so, I give advice here and there. But my CEO, the CEO of the company that I work for, my regular 9-to-5 job, he wanted to run a half marathon. And so I trained him for his first half marathon, and he's actually run 4 now, and he PR'd at the Houston half marathon just 2 weeks ago. But so now he's decided he wants to run a full marathon. The bug has bit. And so I said I would definitely help coach him through that. To say I'm a coach is inaccurate or inappropriate. I will give running advice, but I'm certainly not a coach.
Well, you're the right person then I probably need to talk to. So just a little of my recent history. I ran a half marathon back here in Virginia last September, and I was out training one day, and I just sort of this vision came into my head that I wanted to raise some money for the Hurricane Harvey victims down in Texas. And so I put a little plea out on Facebook, and a friend of mine connected me with a pastor down there in Pearland, Texas. And so we made this connection, and so I talked with them, and I told them I'd probably raise a couple of $100. And friends came in. They were moved by what was happening down there in Texas. So I ended up raising $2,000. Well, a friend reached out to me and said, well, Keith, this story can't stop here now. You need to go down and run a race in Texas and in Houston. I said, I had really been thinking about that, but I went on the Houston Marathon website, and the half marathon was sold out. I said, so I can't do that, because I ran one marathon here in Richmond back in November 2016. Took me about 7 hours to do it. I'm glad I did it, but it was one challenging race. And so when my friend suggested, well, the hurricane victims they're going through a hard time too, so maybe you should step up and do this marathon, which would be a hard thing. And I said, that's really sort of to play the hurricane victim card against me to get me to sign up for a marathon. That's a low running blow, but
Yeah, it's a bit unfair.
but she had a good point, and so I signed up for it. Now, I signed up for it, I think, before I realized that Houston had a 6-hour time limit, where Richmond had 7. But, I trained much harder. I'd gotten faster, lost weight, and I ran 18 miles here in Richmond at the pace I needed to do the 26 there in Houston. So I was really pretty confident. But when we got down there, it was right about mile 18 when it just all fell apart. I had no more in me, and I couldn't finish. Now, in the aftermath, I looked at it. We did some work for a couple of days before the race. There was a lot of on-feet time down there. I took my wife. I've got 9 and 11-year-old boys, so we toured all over Houston. The day before the race, my watch said I'd walked 8 miles. So I think that contributed. But one of the things I want to ask you specifically about, and there was a whole group of us down there, and after the race, many of us complained about soreness that we had never felt in other races, and somebody brought up that Houston surfaces are almost all concrete, which we never run on here in Virginia. Yeah. So,
that's nice.
So do you think that was a factor?
Absolutely. Concrete is so hard on the body. Yeah, I would definitely say that has something to do with it. If you've ever done trail running, I could run 50 miles on a trail and not feel as bad as I do after a marathon on concrete. Not even on like asphalt, but on concrete. It's so much worse.
Well, then I'm going to buy that. I'm going to buy into that one. I'm going to use that as my official excuse. But I am committed to coming back there next January. I'm going to finish what I started. I can't leave that one undone, and we're going to continue to do some things to try to raise money this year for the hurricane victims. So I got 2 reasons for getting back there next January. So as your CEO, is he going to run the marathon before Houston next year, or does he have a goal in mind to run one before then?
No, he wants to run Houston.
Oh, well, good. Well,
yeah, you got to have your hometown marathon as your first marathon.
Absolutely.
I mean, unless you're unfortunate enough to live in Boston, then you're not going to get into your hometown marathon. But yeah, you got to run that as your first.
Absolutely. Well, if I gave you, as we kind of start to wrap it up, an opportunity to try to convince somebody to take on this runner's life, whether it be start, 5K or 10K or all the way up to a marathon, why would you tell somebody to get into this crazy sport?
For the people. I know that sounds nuts. Because you can get, a better body through, CrossFit. You can probably have better food choices if you were a yogi. But the people that you meet, the runners, they're not all type A and they're not all crazy like you've heard, but it's just such a fun sport. It's like a cult. Oh, that's probably not what I should say.
No, I would use that word, and I have used that word.
It's like a happy cult, though. I mean, we're all living off endorphins and runner's high. So it's a great thing. That it's the people that keep me here. It's not the slogging out the miles. And honestly, like when I don't have my friends to run with, the runs are nowhere near as enjoyable. So I would say it's the community, the people in the community, and the friends that you'll make that makes it so wonderful. The actual running is just, an aside.
And I would agree. And I am really grateful to add you to my running community in this interview. You've been a delight to talk to. Your passion for helping folks, and just, again, this sort of parallel that being willing to take some of these first steps, whether it's being willing to say yes to your brother and he got the girl. Now, did they go on to get married, or was that just a brief thing?
No, they were together, oh my gosh, maybe like 5 or 6 years, but then they split up. He's now married to another very lovely woman.
Does she run marathons?
No, and he doesn't run anymore either. He's in the military. He's got no time for that.
All right. But it's you are a shining example of being willing to step out, be open to learning new things, and then who knows, maybe develop this whole new passion that you never knew you had in there. So I'm grateful that you shared that with us today, Bernie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me share that with you. It has just really enriched my life. And so I encourage everybody, take a step, whether it's volunteering or actually getting out there and starting your own chapter. If your city needs it, take it on. It's not as hard as it sounds like. One of my favorite quotes is Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done.
Absolutely. What a beautiful way to finish it. Well, I am definitely going to look you up next January when I come back to Houston. I may look you up before then, because if you can coach that CEO to his first, maybe you can help me finish my first Houston Marathon. So who knows, maybe by then you will be an official coach, mine.
Okay. Please do look me up. If you don't reach out to me before that, definitely look me up and come meet up with our group that weekend. You can see like the beautiful chaos that is the Athletes with Disabilities Division getting off the starting line. I cry every year because it's just so magical.
I will be there, and I look forward to experiencing it. Bernie, thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. Have a good weekend as well.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Bernie as much as I did. It was just a pleasant surprise to find her as delightful as she was and as absolutely inspiring as she is. So I hope you will take something away from that conversation. You know, one of the powerful things she said that I'd never really thought of in the way that she said it was that running has given her this gift of her grit or internal fortitude, however you want to describe that. You know, she said she thinks that it was always sort of there in her, but running gifted her with the revelation, I guess, that, boy, I have this thing inside me. And boy, has she tapped into it once she discovered it. So I think running gives all of us a gift if we'll just give ourselves the chance and give running a chance to reveal that to us. So thank you, Bernie, so much for being a part of this show. I encourage everybody to follow her lead and looking at your different races in your community. Who are they accessible to? Who are they not? Again, I love what she talked about in running. The more she did it, the more she just discovered some of the injustices out there, and especially as they pertain to the injustices of who can get out there and participate in a race and who can't. And maybe if we all step up and just open our eyes, look around, and discover some opportunities that might be there for others to engage in this beautiful community that so many of us are involved in, that we may be able to lend a voice to some folks like Bernie has lent to folks in Houston, and it sounds like far beyond Houston. Anyhow, what a great conversation. What a great day I hope you all have. If you get out there this week, do some running, and you never know what running might gift you with. But if running's not your thing, get out there, maybe cheer for somebody. Cheering's a pretty cool thing to do, and runners love it. And if running's just not your thing, then I guess I am doubly happy that you stopped by here today to listen to this conversation. I think you can always pick up some motivations, some inspirations that apply to life as much as, and many, many times more than, the running life. Y'all have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time. See ya.